All of the Chicago Bears trade talk this offseason has been about Maxx Crosby, and for good reason. But there are also some other potentially intriguing options out there that could be more affordable and more realistic.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to take a look at some other Chicago Bears trade targets not named Maxx Crosby that could both be affordable for Chicago and maybe even more realistic because of being a little bit more affordable, and whether or not these other teams might be more willing to deal their players than the Raiders will be to deal Maxx Crosby. We'll take a look at a couple of defensive linemen from the New York Giants, a couple of edge rushers from the Pittsburgh Steelers, a couple of veteran safeties, as well as some other defensive line targets that have some big names that might be worth taking a flyer on. I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on NBA Future Bet and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. And when I look at other names the Chicago Bears could trade for, beyond the big one, Maxx Crosby, that everyone talks about, and we've talked about Maxx Crosby on this podcast before. If you want to go back and listen to last week, we talked a little bit about how maybe it's not the right fit for the Chicago Bears at this time, but some other players who could be better fits in terms of cost and what the Bears are looking for right now in this process. And two names that jump right to the top of my list both come from the New York Giants. And I don't mean this conversation to be like a ranking in order of #1 trade target all the way down to whatever, #7 trade target, or however many players we end up going through today. But I think I find myself just right away, surface level, most intrigued by either of the Giants' potential trade options, two different positions, but nose tackle Dexter Lawrence and edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeaux. Both players in very different circumstances as to why the Giants might be willing to trade them, and two very different calculuses for the Chicago Bears, but two players that I like a lot that would fit important needs on this Bears roster and certainly represent upgrades there that could be significantly more affordable in terms of draft capital and certainly salary cap space than what someone like Maxx Crosby would cost. Now, in exchange, you're getting players that aren't nearly as good as Maxx Crosby. So that's sort of the trade-off here. But as we talked about before, I don't know that the Bears need more than just a Maxx Crosby caliber player. So going all in on that might be a little bit too hasty for where the Bears are right now. But let's start with, say, nose tackle Dexter Lawrence. Someone who, do you want to be paying a nose tackle a bunch of money? People, it's like, oh, well, is nose tackle that valuable? Well, Dexter Lawrence has been. And I know he was dealing with injuries a little bit this past season, and that's part of why the Giants might be willing to move on from him. He is 28, will turn 29 during next season, but he's the rare nose tackle who is both dominant against the run and a high-level pass rusher as well. You'll see he only had half a sack this past season, despite playing 17 games. He was not 100% healthy working through that. But the year before, he had 9 sacks. He had 7.5 sacks in 2022. This is a player who his first job is not rushing the passer, and he still finds a way to make a high impact as a pass rusher. Now, as a result, he is due just under $27 million this year from the New York Giants, and that's why they might be more willing to move on at this stage of the process, knowing that they've got some work to do under a new regime, a new system, and he's approaching 30 and just had a down year, and all the other reasons why a team might be willing to move on. They would save about $13 million in salary cap space if they traded him away this offseason, and they could use a little bit extra money to keep kind of building around there. I mean, I know they've got a decent amount of space as it sits today, but a little bit. I guess they're right around where the Bears are in terms of functional cap space here. So they could use a little bit of wiggle room here and there. And do they want to be paying a nose tackle that kind of money? Well, you could spin the question around and say, do the Bears want to be paying a nose tackle that kind of money? And for a comparison, if the Bears traded for him, his cap hit would be about $20 million this season, but none of it's guaranteed. And that's the great part, right? Yes, he's going to cost you $20 million when he plays for you this season, but if for whatever reason he's still injured or over the hill at 28 for some, for whatever reason, something goes wrong and it doesn't work out this season, you can cut him. You would be able to cut him the following year and really have no money owed towards him, right? You're not locked into a long term of Dexter Lawrence. And to me, he would be such a massive upgrade on the interior, especially if you find a way to get out of Grady Jarrett's contract, so you're not paying both these defensive tackles a ton of money. Like, I think Dexter Lawrence is he's been one of the special defensive tackles in recent years. He wasn't this past season, so can I buy low on a player that I feel pretty good about bringing him in here and getting him high level? It's not like when the Bears signed Grady Jarrett, where he had been struggling for a little while, in large part, because he's on the older side. Like Dexter Lawrence is still, again, 28 years old. Like this is still his prime, and someone who I think you could really, really make a big difference on the interior, both in the running game and as a pass rusher. Now, what that looks like in terms of trade compensation, I'm not willing to give up first-round pick for him or anything. I mean, I don't even know if I'd do a second-round pick. I mean, you have to kind of find a compensation that works well for both sides. But to me, I think he's a player that would cost you less cap space and less draft picks than somebody like Maxx Crosby, and not going to have a Crosby-sized impact, but it's still a significant, massive one on the interior that leaves you then more draft picks and more cap space to keep building around the rest of your roster, to go get that edge rusher to help out there. The other edge rusher option, though, from the New York Giants is the much younger Kayvon Thibodeau, who is 25, still approaching the prime of his career, but far from a proven, dominant pass rusher. Like this is another step down in terms of tier of caliber of player, and he's dealt with injuries the last couple seasons. So this is definitely a buy low type of bid in Thibodeau. Right? I'm not necessarily trading for Kayvon Thibodeau thinking that's going to solve all of my defensive line problems, but I like the idea of taking a flyer on a young player with a crap ton of upside who we have seen have double-digit sacks in the NFL. So Thibodeau had 11 and a half sacks in 2023, his second season. Then 2 years ago, 2024, he missed 5 games and had 5.5 sacks. This past season, he missed 7 games and only had 2.5 sacks. Like, injuries have been a factor for him for sure, and that's a red flag. But then also, we have seen the Giants go out and draft Abdul Carter at the top of the draft last year. They traded for and then gave a big contract extension to Brian Burns as well to be their top edge rusher in there. So all of a sudden, Kayvon Thibodeau is the odd man out, and he is now entering the 5th year of his rookie contract, and they're not going to pay him a long-term contract extension. They can't afford, they've got their 2 top edge rushers. He's not going to get a long-term deal from the Giants. So the Giants might just say, screw it, let's get something for him instead of purely just letting him walk. And that's where a team like the Chicago Bears could enter the mix. Now, Thibodeau's a 1-year flyer type of player, and he's going to cost you $14.75 million this season on his 5th-year deal. He's not necessarily crazy cheap, but I do think he is going to be cheaper than some of the other free agent options, even ones not named Trey Hendrickson, right? Kayvon Thibodeau's for almost $15 million is probably about what someone like Khalil Mack could cost you this offseason. Someone like Jalen Phillips could cost you this offseason. Those guys will probably be on 1-year deals anyway. So do I want to take a 1-year flyer on a 25-year-old who could get back to being an 11.5 sack guy if he's healthy and, on a Bears defensive line with Montez Sweat and maybe another addition on defensive tackle? Or am I taking a 1-year flyer on a veteran in free agency like a Khalil Mack or whoever that you're not sure how much they both have question marks, right? It's just ones that they're just at opposite ends of the spectrum here. So if I could give up, some kind of reasonably late round pick to take a shot at Kayvon Thibodeau, see how he does this season, and then potentially have the ability to give him a contract extension if he plays well. And if he doesn't, well, I only gave up a day 3 draft pick. We gave it a shot and he was okay, but not ready for the big deal. I just like the idea of giving that a chance on a guy who was a number 5 overall pick, who still has a lot of upside, and it just kind of was the odd man out in New York because of other circumstances of how they just acquired too many good pass rushers. It's kind of like the Bears getting rid of Cole Kmet or DJ Moore. They're not they wouldn't get rid of them because they're not good players, but because they kind of lucked into other stuff that was better, and now you're just trying to get some value for that player potentially. I like the idea of buying low on Thibodeau and seeing if you can get more out of him than the Giants have the last couple of seasons, because at least we've seen it at the NFL level. It's not like, oh, he's never done it before, like Dayo Odengbo. It's like, no, we've seen him be very good. Maybe not elite, but very good. So get me a buy low, high upside pass rusher that can give you some real pass rushing repertoire there, to be a good running mate for Montez Sweat and be a long-term piece as opposed to potentially a short-term piece. I think it's worth at least seeing what that asking price might actually be. But the Giants are not the only trade partners the Bears should be calling. Those are not the only edge rushers and defensive tackles the Bears should be calling after. I want to look at an interesting situation in Pittsburgh where the Bears could pry away a pass rusher, as well as some other veterans around the NFL that could be some buy low candidates to fix some of the Bears' needs. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. It's a huge time saver, and it gives you real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, just make sure you file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Just as the New York Giants are in a little bit of a bind with a logjam at the edge rusher position, so too are the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's another team that if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm giving a call and saying, what would it take to get one of these guys off of your hand? But unlike the Giants, with Pittsburgh, it's a little more up in the air who they might actually want to get rid of. They're going to have to get rid of somebody, but they're not as clearly hamstrung as to who it will be. So like we talked about with the Giants, where Abdul Carter's not going anywhere, Brian Burns isn't going anywhere, Kayvon Thibodeau is the odd man out. In Pittsburgh, they've got a similar three-man depth chart at edge rusher that are all good players that they'd like to keep, but they know they can't afford to keep all three, but they could kind of, in theory, keep any combination of the three, and it's hard to predict exactly which one they might be willing to give up. But if you watched any Pittsburgh Steelers football this season, you know their three edge rushers are TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig. And each of those names, I think, carries a different cachet, a different level of confidence. But I do think any of the three of them are starting caliber edge rushers in the NFL, and any of the three of them would be upgrades over what the Chicago Bears have at their edge rusher position opposite Montez Sweat. But each of those three guys would come with a very different set of dynamics that the Bears would have to consider in making a potential deal. So let's start with TJ Watt, because he was a name that Bears fans at least threw out a bit last offseason when he was holding out of Pittsburgh. I don't think that was ever a realistic option for Pittsburgh to get rid of him or for the Bears to acquire him at the time that Bears fans were talking about it. But we all know how good TJ Watt is. In all likelihood, a future Hall of Fame pass rusher. I mean, maybe not first ballot, but 8-time Pro Bowler, 115 career sacks. He's led the NFL in sacks 3 different times. I don't think it's a hot take to say he's a future Hall of Fame edge rusher. But TJ Watt is 32, turns 32 in October, so 31 will be 32 this upcoming season. He is just got a massive contract extension that's going to pay him. He's going to cost $42 million for the Steelers this year, $42 million next year, and in 2028, when he is 34 years old, he is set to cost them $46 million. And so if you are trading for TJ Watt at this point, you would be trading for a soon-to-be 32-year-old who's going to cost over $40 million a year. And I think technically, if the Bears were to trade for him, the way the contract structure is played out, he would cost you 32 this year, 32 next year, and then quick math, I think it'd be 46 for 2028, but there is a roster bonus in 2028 that if you got out of the contract, you wouldn't have to keep him that way. Nonetheless, he would be cheaper than some of the other top pass rushers if you traded for him. I don't know that Pittsburgh is going to be eager to trade for him less than a full calendar year after having just given him a contract extension, but now Mike Tomlin is gone, and it's a whole new coaching staff there, so you never know. Same general manager, front office, so that complicates things a little bit. And then also, TJ Watt's 32, well, about to be 32, and it just had 7 sacks this past season, and it's dealing with some injuries in there, but just maybe not quite as great. And the year before, 2024, 11 and a half felt like a little bit of a down year for him, and so it's been 2 full seasons since he's been a 19-sack game-changing type guy. So then how much, if you're the Bears, for example, how much are you willing to give up for an expensive older player who hasn't been as dominant for 2 years now? Like, to me, I find it less and less attractive the farther you go through there. But for Pittsburgh, given how expensive and old he is and how the production has dropped off a little bit, maybe they would be more willing to give up him than someone like Alex Highsmith or even Nick Herbig, who certainly don't have the pedigree or the dominance that Watt has had, but they're younger, cheaper, and more affordable guys that can be more part of the long-term future as opposed to the short-term future for Watt. But from a Bears perspective, Alex Highsmith, for example, 28, turns 29 this season, so right in the prime of his career. He had 14 and a half sacks a couple years ago, but it's been consistently like a 7, 8, 9 sack guy over the last few seasons. Has dealt with some injuries as well, and that's a red flag to keep an eye on here. But generally, a consistent pass rusher off of the edge. Maybe benefits from having TJ Watt on one side, but like he'll have Montez Sweat on one side in Chicago. Not the same, but it's not like he has to be the number one in Chicago, just like he was the number 2 in Pittsburgh. He can be the number 2 in Chicago. And if you bolster the defensive tackle position, you can start to talk yourself into it a little bit. And for comparison, like Alex Highsmith, he only costs $20 million this year and 21 the year after that. And if you traded for him, he'd really only cost you about 15 in each of the next 2 seasons. So like he would be a really good price for a productive edge rusher who's 28. And he could have a couple good years in Chicago. You could extend him. Like he could be here for as many as 5 seasons, whereas TJ Watt, you're getting maybe 2 out of him. So like you can see, for all the reasons it'd be exciting for the Bears or attractive for the Bears, it might be more attractive for the Pittsburgh Steelers to have to keep to want to hold on to him. And so does that bring us then to Nick Herbig as the number 3 option here in Goldilocks and the 3 pass rushers? I don't know if he's just right either, because Nick Herbig is a really strong edge rusher. Number 3 in that rotation, had 7.5 sacks last season without really being a full-time starter. I guess filled in for Watt and Highsmith when they were injured, but like he's always gotten to be the number 3, and he's gone from 3 sacks as a rookie to 5.5 in his second year, 7.5 now in his third season. He's entering year 4 of his rookie contract. So that means he's super cheap at $1.3 million, but also means he's going to need a contract extension, which is why the Steelers might trade one of these guys, because you can't pay TJ Watt $40 million, Alex Highsmith $20 million, and give Nick Herbig a big contract extension. So you either let Herbig walk or trade him, or you trade Highsmith and pay Herbig, or you trade Watt and pay Herbig, but like they can't keep all 3 at the level that they would want to. And I think Herbig is one of these guys that he hasn't gotten to be the full-time starter, but could absolutely lock down a starting role in the NFL. Is he ever going to be a 15 to 20 sack guy like TJ Watt? Probably not. But I think he can be a double-digit sack guy for you. And if that's your number 2 edge rusher, I think that's worth giving a moderate contract extension too. Like the fact that he hasn't been a starter like for a full season should keep that contract extension price down a little bit at least. And I like the idea of like trading for him and extending him. He's forced 9 fumbles in 3 seasons. He had his first interception and 3 pass breakups this past season, a bunch of quarterback hits. He's a solid tackler. He's maybe not dominant against the run, but holds up just fine there too. And he's, again, 24, turns 25 this season. He could be part of your team for 5+ years if it worked out as good as you would hope it through. So like you can see why Pittsburgh would want to keep this young guy and extend him, but then you got to get rid of Highsmith or Watt. And as we kind of talked about with all 3 of these guys, there's reasons for Pittsburgh to want to keep them, reasons for Pittsburgh to want to get rid of them. And I don't know who they're going to want to get rid of. I'm sure they should at least listen to calls for one of them, unless they're just going to let Herbig walk in free agency next year and try and get a compensatory pick for him. But I would think, a team like the Bears would be willing to give up a slightly higher draft pick than what Pittsburgh might get in compensatory pick. Like, I'm not giving up a second or third round pick for Nick Herbig necessarily, but like we could start to talk in the 4th or 5th round potentially. I mean, he was a 4th round pick himself in 2023. I mean, we don't need to get bogged down on exactly what the trade compensation would be. The point is, there's 3 edges in Pittsburgh. One of them should be able to be pried out of there. And each one has significant pros and significant cons along the way. So it's a fascinating situation for both Pittsburgh and for the Bears to kind of consider. Who might you like? Some of it's going to come down to like how much you trust the injury evaluations on Highsmith and Watt, how much you could work with the numbers on Herbig versus potentially Watt and trying to move some of the money around there. It's fascinating, but they're definitely a team to keep an eye on as Ryan Poles starts talking to general managers at the NFL Combine this week as well. Some other veterans I want to run through. None of them are teammates like the last 2 groups we talked about, but like some guys that are big names that could be nice additions to the Bears to buy low on and bolster some positions in need. All these are going to be on defense because there's just not really a position on offense for Chicago to trade for. But we'll take a look at some guys, a couple of defensive tackles, one more edge rushers, and how about a veteran safety or two? Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into a reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use a profit boost from FanDuel on any NBA futures bet, and you'll automatically be entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right, flights, tickets, the whole experience. And here's the thing. You don't even have to win your bet. Win or lose, you're entered in for that chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. So if you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock it in. Especially this time of year, you can pick whether you're picking a team to win a championship or grab a conference title. It just adds that extra layer of excitement to every game down the stretch. And now, not only can your pick cash, but it could also send you to the NBA Finals. So visit FanDuel.com to get started and use your profit boost on an NBA future to be entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I do want to thank you again for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, and really appreciate whether you're tuning in for the first time or the 500th time. Every time you tune in, it's why we do the podcast. You are who we are here for. And if you want to take your podcast listening to the next level, you can check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club to get access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears. It's compatible with Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any of the podcasting platforms. Plus, you'll also get access to a Locked On Bears group chat exclusively for listeners of this show. So if you want to check it out, head on over to the website lockedonbears.supercast.com to find out more. And you can always find that link in the show notes description, wherever it is you tune in to Locked On Bears. But some other names I want to run through a little bit more quickly. We talked about the Steelers and the Giants having some guys that they might be willing to get rid of. The rest of these are a little bit more one-offs that I thought I'd just kind of bundle together here all in one shot. Another guy coming up on the end of his rookie contract that his team might be more interested in trading him than trying to pay him on it, that the Bears have a connection to, is Trayvon Walker from the Jacksonville Jaguars. He was you may recall him as the number one overall pick, 4 years ago now? And he's gone on to kind of have some up and down seasons here. I don't think he has quite lived up exactly to what they wanted, but had, 10 sacks in 2023, 10 and a half in 2024, then some injuries this past season at 3.5 sacks. I don't get the impression Jacksonville wants to give him a top of the market defensive line, edge rusher contract. But the Bears defensive line coach, Jeremy Garrett, was the Jaguars defensive line coach in 2024 when Trayvon Walker had a career high 10.5 sacks. And so if any defensive line coach, knows what they'd be getting into, it would be the Bears defensive line coach. Now, how much you give up for him, given that there are some question marks there, and then you let him ride out this season and then decide whether you want to pay him and then how much you pay him if it's one good season. There's some complicating factors in there. But I do like the idea of when you trade for a player, having a coach on staff who literally has worked with him already, so you know exactly how he carries himself at practice, how hard he works in the weight room, what he's like in the locker room and on the sidelines of games. You eliminate some of the potential unknowns or I don't want to say red flags, but just it makes it that much more confident that you know exactly what you're getting, as opposed to a guy who you watch on tape and he's great and you show up and you realize, you know what, he's not exactly what we thought we were getting with him. But 25 years old and still plenty of upside there that you know him a little bit. And if you get a former number one overall pick defensive end at a discount, I certainly would see him as an upgrade over what the Bears have at the edge rusher position right now. Another defensive lineman that you'd hope you could get at a little bit of a discount is Ed Oliver from the Buffalo Bills. Ed Oliver is still, I think, a high-level interior pass rusher. I mean, I know he only had 3 sacks this season because he missed most of it with injury. He only had 3 sacks the year before that. So, I mean, it has been a minute since he's produced at a super high level. But like Dexter Lawrence, we talked about earlier, this is a 28-year-old defensive tackle. This is not an age thing where he's just over the hill now and he's not going to be any good anymore. It's a health thing that if you're confident he's good to go, he's a great 3-technique pass rusher. For Buffalo, They're switching from Sean McDermott's 4-3 to Jim Leonard's 3-4 scheme, and Ed Oliver doesn't have a natural positional fit there. A little too small to be a nose tackle, not quite long enough to be the 5 technique defensive end. Like, Akeem Hicks did it, but Akeem Hicks was a little bit bigger than Ed Oliver. You go from 3 tech to outside, and you can, like they might make it work in Buffalo, but maybe they'd be willing to say, hey, we got to clear some salary cap space here, because Buffalo is not particularly abreast. They're currently $16 million or so over the salary cap. And so they might look at this and say, we could make it work with Ed Oliver, but it's not ideal. So if we could save a bunch of money in doing it and get something decent enough in return, I think that could be a huge interior pass rush upgrade for Chicago. One that is not going to be cheap against the salary cap. I think this would, again, you got to find a way to maybe get out of Grady Jarrett's contract. I mean, Ed Oliver is going to cost you this season right around $17-ish million. So, I mean, it's not terribly expensive, but just, not easy to just slide in under your salary cap if you trade for him. But nonetheless, I think he could be a particularly good upgrade. And one other name I'll throw in from that position quickly is there's been speculation that the Cowboys might want to move on from Kenny Clark because he's really expensive, even though they just traded for him. But they have they had just got Quinnen Williams in a trade last season. He's costing them a bunch. Can they afford to pay 2 defensive tackles that much money? And Kenny Clark hasn't been as great, and he's 31. So I'm only doing the Kenny Clark trade if it's late round draft pick because he's expensive and hasn't been as good as he was when he was younger. But if you traded for him, he might be a salary cap casualty type of guy where he would take a pay cut, knowing that if he was released, he's not going to get as much money as he would get if he just chose to take a pay cut. So if you get him to take a pay cut and it was a late round pick kind of thing, I wouldn't totally be opposed to Kenny Clark there. But that one's a little bit of a tougher sell. But you can make the compensation and the money work where he's cheaper and it doesn't cost hardly much at all for draft capital. Sure, that's an upgrade for your defensive tackle depth that he can rotate in there. 2 names, though, I want to throw in here real quick at the safety position. We've been talking all defensive linemen all show here because that's the biggest need for the Bears this offseason, for sure. But safety's one that don't sleep on, that if Dennis Allen sees a guy that he likes, instead of trying to re-sign both Byard and Brisker or try and find another safety in free agency, you could go out and get a veteran that's already on somebody else's team. 2 names I want to talk about here very quickly. First, let's go Jesse Bates of the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta's a team that also, brand new whole regime with new general manager from the Bears, of course, Ian Cunningham, and then new head coach Kevin Stefanski, and I think they actually keep retaining their defensive coordinator. But nonetheless, they're resetting a little bit in Atlanta, and they would like to clear some salary cap space, and Jesse Bates is one of their most expensive contracts. I still think he's a very good player, but he's 29 and is entering the last year of his current deal. And so there's questions like, Atlanta it sounds like they don't really want to give him a contract extension, and he's super expensive, so you're going to lose him as a free agent next year then, so would you rather just trade for him and get something for it? Well, it's tricky because, if they do trade for him, they're going to eat a little bit of dead money on it, so the cap savings is a little bit smaller, but if they can get a draft pick in return, because they're also a team that's really low on draft picks, they might be more willing to do so. If the Bears traded for him, he'd cost them about $14 million this season, which is about what somebody like Jaquan Brisker is going to be trying to get on the market anyway, and Bates is a high-level, consistent, proven safety in the NFL, a veteran that's really going to really going to give you something solid there. He's had at least 3 interceptions in each of the last 4 seasons, and he's just a good player. I don't mean to rave about how good Jesse Bates is, but he's one of the better safeties in the NFL, consistently healthy on the field. Yes, he's a little older. Yes, in the last year of his deal, so you don't want to give up a huge draft, super early draft pick for him. But if you could buy low and kind of get the Falcons in a little bit of a fire sale type of situation there, I think he could be a potential fun fit there. And then the other safety that's available potentially via trade that's been floated out there is Minkah Fitzpatrick from the Miami Dolphins. Another team in a fire sale type of situation, another 30-year-old safety who's on a team that is rebuilding, so they don't really need to have a 30-year-old, and he's in the last year of his deal, so he's going to hit free agency next offseason. Dolphins might just say, well, let's get something for him, as opposed to paying him. He's going to cost the Dolphins $19 million this season. If you traded for him, he'd only cost the Bears about $15 million. Still playing at a high level, still a versatile piece that could be an upgrade for the Bears in the secondary. Again, you're looking at a shorter term type of piece because he turns 30 this season. You could give him an extension for a year or 2. I'd still want to draft a safety if you traded for Bates or Fitzpatrick, but you could really have a dynamic duo with either of those guys with Kevin Byard if the Bears really want to go all in on both during that position and saying we are going to have great safeties, and that's going to really be the key section of this Bears defense. So it's certainly not Maxx Crosby or bust this offseason is kind of the broader point here. And I'm sure all sorts of trade rumors are going to be coming out this week at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, where I will also be this week. Starting, I guess, it'll be Tuesday's podcast or maybe Wednesday's podcast. I'm not getting into late Tuesday. So anyway, Wednesday through the weekend, I will be doing a podcast live from Indianapolis. It won't be my normal, usual setup here, but we'll still be bringing you your daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to check out the Everydayers Club if you want access to that ad-free audio feed. Otherwise, you can keep tuning into Locked On Bears the same way you always do. We're free and available on all platforms. And each time that you tune in, you're going to leave with another opportunity to bear down.